Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people's story. Looking back, I should have seen the warning signs when I first moved into this neighborhood 2 years ago. The pristine lawns that looked like they were cut with nail scissors, the identical mailboxes lined up like soldiers, and the way every single house followed the exact same color palette. But I was 42, semi-retired from my tech company, and looking for a peaceful place to enjoy the fruits of my labor. The house was perfect for me. Large, private backyard with mature trees, away from the street noise, and situated on nearly an acre in what the real estate agent kept calling a master-planned community. The HOA fees seemed reasonable enough, and I figured how bad could it really be? The community center with its swimming pool was a nice bonus, though I noticed during my house tour that the pool looked a bit tired and the water seemed cloudier than it should be. I settled into my new life pretty quickly, working from my home office, maintaining my small garden, and generally keeping to myself. The neighbors seemed friendly enough, though I noticed they all had this slightly nervous energy whenever certain people drove by in golf carts. I soon learned why. The HOA president was a woman everyone just called by her first name, as if she were some kind of local celebrity. She patrolled the neighborhood daily in her white golf cart, clipboard in hand, looking for violations. I watched from my office window as she'd stop at houses, take photos, and scribble notes. She had this very serious, self-important way about her, like she was conducting matters of national security rather than checking if someone's garden gnome was too tall. For the first year and a half, I flew under the radar. I kept my grass cut, my house painted in approved colors, and my trash cans properly stored. But as I got more comfortable in my new home, I started thinking about improvements. Specifically, I wanted something to help with my fitness routine and stress relief. That's when I discovered swim spas. These amazing units combine the best features of a hot tub and a lap pool. You can swim against a current for exercise, then relax in the heated water afterward. I researched different models for months, finally settling on a top-of-the-line unit that cost more than most people's cars. It was a significant investment, but I figured I'd earned it. Before making the purchase, I did what any responsible homeowner would do. I sat down with the HOA covenant documents, all 347 pages of them, and read through every single rule and regulation. The swimming pool section was crystal clear. It prohibited permanent in-ground swimming pools without prior approval from the Architectural Review Committee. The language was very specific about in-ground and permanent installations. My swim spa was neither. It was a self-contained, above-ground unit that could be drained and moved if necessary. It would sit on a reinforced concrete pad I was having poured on my patio, but it wasn't permanently attached to anything. Confident I was following the rules, I ordered the unit. The installation took 2 days. The concrete pad was poured first, then the swim spa was delivered and set up by professionals. It was beautiful. Sleek white fiberglass with LED lighting and digital controls. I spent the first evening testing all the features, swimming against the current, then relaxing in the warm water as the sun set. It was exactly what I'd hoped for. 48 hours later, everything changed. I was making coffee Tuesday morning when I noticed an envelope in my mailbox that hadn't been there the night before. The return address made my stomach drop. It was from the HOA management company. Inside was a formal violation notice that made my blood pressure spike immediately. The letter stated I had been fined $1,000 for unauthorized pool installation and was given 14 days to remove the structure or face additional fines of $100 per day. They cited the same section of the covenant I had read, but somehow interpreted my swim spa as violating the rules about permanent pools. I read the letter 3 times, getting angrier each time. This was exactly the kind of petty tyranny I'd heard about but hoped to avoid. I immediately called the management company and requested a hearing to appeal the fine. The appeal meeting was scheduled for the following week at the community center. I spent the weekend preparing my case like I was going to court. I printed out the swim spa specifications, took detailed photos showing how it sat on the pad without any permanent connections, and highlighted the relevant sections of the HOA covenant that clearly distinguished between in-ground pools and what I had installed. Walking into that community center meeting room was like entering a kangaroo court. The 5 board members sat behind a folding table looking like they'd already made up their minds. The president sat in the center, flanked by her loyal supporters who nodded along with everything she said. I presented my case methodically. I explained that my swim spa was not in-ground, could be moved if necessary, and therefore did not violate the specific language of the covenant. I showed them the manufacturer's specifications that clearly labeled it as a portable spa unit. I even brought printouts of dictionary definitions to prove my point. The board members barely looked at my evidence. Instead, they exchanged glances and whispered among themselves while I was speaking. When I finished my presentation, the president leaned back in her chair and gave me a condescending smile. She told me that the board interpreted the rules as they saw fit, and in their opinion, anything that held water and could be used for swimming was a pool, regardless of what the dictionary or manufacturer might say. She said they didn't care about technical specifications or legal definitions. The board's interpretation was final. Then she delivered the line that would come back to haunt her. She said that, frankly, she didn't see what the big deal was. If I wanted to use a pool so badly, there was a perfectly good community pool that all residents could share. She suggested I should try using it sometime instead of wasting the board's time with frivolous appeals. The other board members nodded along like bobbleheads. They unanimously denied my appeal and confirmed that the fine would stand. I was told that if the swim spa wasn't removed within 14 days, the daily fines would begin accumulating. I left that meeting furious but trying to stay composed. These people had essentially told me that rules meant whatever they wanted them to mean, and there was nothing I could do about it. But they had also inadvertently given me an idea with that comment about the community pool. Rather than fight a losing battle over the fine, I decided to pay it under protest and take a different approach. I wrote a check for $1,000 and started making some phone calls. The first was to a lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes. The second was to a private investigator who helped businesses conduct due diligence. As a homeowner in the association, I had certain rights, including access to financial records and meeting minutes. My lawyer helped me draft formal requests for several years' worth of HOA documents. The board was legally required to provide them, though they tried to delay and heavily redacted many pages. What I discovered in those documents was eye-opening. The HOA was in terrible financial shape, primarily due to deferred maintenance on the community pool. The filtration system was failing, the pool surface needed complete resurfacing, and there were major plumbing issues. The total estimated repair cost was over $250,000. Even more interesting was what I found in the meeting minutes. The board had been discussing these problems for months, but kept delaying action because they knew the only way to pay for the repairs was a special assessment that would cost each homeowner thousands of dollars. They were terrified of the political backlash, especially with board elections coming up. The petty fines they'd been levying on residents were a desperate attempt to raise money, but it was like trying to fill a swimming pool with a teaspoon. They were basically rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. That's when my lawyer found the golden ticket buried in the HOA original charter documents. There was a clause that allowed the board to sell corporate assets without a full homeowner vote if it was necessary to avoid insolvency or prevent a special assessment exceeding 20% of the annual budget. The community pool and the land it sat on were technically owned by the HOA corporation as a separate parcel. According to the charter, the board could sell it if they deemed it financially necessary. I had my lawyer set up a new LLC with a generic name that wouldn't be traced back to me. Through this company, we submitted a formal offer to purchase the pool parcel from the HOA. The offer was strategically calculated to be just enough to cover the HOA current debts plus the estimated pool repair costs, making it incredibly attractive to a board desperate to avoid political suicide. My lawyer presented the offer as coming from investors interested in developing a private recreation facility. The board saw it as a miracle solution to their financial problems. They could pay off their debts, avoid the special assessment, and frame it to the community as fiscally responsible leadership. The board meeting where they discussed the offer was packed with residents who had no idea what was really happening. The president stood up and announced they had received an offer from a development company to purchase the pool area. She spun it as a fantastic deal that would save every homeowner thousands of dollars in special assessments while eliminating the ongoing maintenance burden. She didn't mention that selling the pool meant the community would lose its main amenity. She didn't explain that they were only selling because they had mismanaged the finances so badly that major repairs were impossible. She just focused on how much money everyone would save. The board voted unanimously to accept the offer. Residents applauded, thinking their elected representatives had pulled off some kind of financial miracle. The sale closed 3 weeks later. For the first week after closing, nothing happened. I wanted to let the reality sink in before making my next move. Then I had a crew begin installing an 8-foot privacy fence around the entire pool area. Residents started asking questions when they saw the fence going up, but there were no answers from the board. The fence was completed over a weekend, and Monday morning there was a professional sign mounted on the gate that read, "The Oasis Club, Private Recreation Facility, Property of Suburban Land Holdings LLC, Authorized Members Only." That's when the neighborhood erupted. People who had voted to sell the pool suddenly realized they no longer had access to it. They started calling the management company demanding explanations. The board members who had been so confident about their decision were now scrambling to control the damage. I let the chaos build for a few more days, then had renovation crews begin work. Every morning, residents could hear construction sounds coming from behind the fence. Delivery trucks brought in high-end materials. Landscaping crews arrived with mature plants and trees. The transformation took 6 weeks. I had the old, worn pool completely resurfaced with natural stone coping. A waterfall feature was added along with underwater LED lighting. I built a small sauna and changing facility, installed several cabanas with outdoor furniture, and had the entire area professionally landscaped. When the renovation was complete, I sent a letter to every house in the neighborhood on my LLC's official letterhead. The letter introduced the Oasis Club as a private recreation facility and explained that due to insurance and liability concerns, membership was strictly by invitation only. As a courtesy to the surrounding community, I was offering limited day passes at $500 per person. The neighborhood was in complete uproar. The board that had been so proud of their financial wizardry was now facing calls for resignation. Residents who had applauded the sale were demanding to know why they weren't told they'd be losing pool access. Property values were dropping as potential buyers learned the community no longer had a pool. The truth about the board's financial mismanagement came out during the angry town halls that followed. Residents learned their elected representatives had been hiding the pool's deteriorating condition and using petty fines to try covering massive maintenance costs. The president, who had been so dismissive of my appeal, was now facing daily confrontations from angry neighbors. Board elections were moved up by popular demand. Every single incumbent was voted out by overwhelming margins. The new board publicly apologized for their predecessor's deception and promised transparency going forward. Meanwhile, I was enjoying my private oasis. Every evening after work, I'd swim laps in my perfectly maintained pool, then relax in the spa jets while watching the sunset. Sometimes I'd see the former board president walking her dog past the fence, and she'd always look away quickly when she spotted me. The best part was remembering her words from that appeal meeting. She had told me I should try using the community pool instead of wasting their time. Well, I had taken her advice. I was using the community pool, except now it was my pool. A few months later, I was floating in my heated pool on a Saturday morning, coffee in hand, when I heard voices on the other side of the fence. A family was walking by, and I caught fragments of their conversation about the beautiful sounds coming from the water features. The father was explaining to his kids how the old board had sold their pool because they didn't want to fix it properly. The mother added that the new board was much better and actually listened to residents. I smiled and took another sip of my coffee. The neighborhood was definitely better off without the old board's petty tyranny and financial incompetence. Property values had recovered once word spread about the new, responsible leadership, and I had inadvertently become something of a local legend, though most people still didn't know I was the one who bought the pool. The former president moved away about 6 months after the election. I heard through neighborhood gossip that she couldn't handle the daily reminders of her downfall. Her replacement sent me a very polite letter asking if I might consider allowing limited community access during certain hours, perhaps in exchange for a modest annual fee. I politely declined. Some lessons need to stick. These days, my swim spa still sits on my patio where it's always been. The HOA has never bothered me about it again. The new board seems to understand the difference between reasonable rules and petty harassment. They focus on actual community issues rather than measuring pool heights and counting garden gnomes. I still use my swim spa regularly, but there's something special about my weekend swims in the main pool. As I float there in perfectly heated water, surrounded by lush landscaping and the gentle sound of waterfalls, I often think about that board meeting where they told me to use the community pool. They were right. I should use the community pool. And I do, every single day. Sometimes the best revenge is simply taking someone's advice and following it to its logical conclusion. The former board wanted me to respect their authority and use the community amenities like everyone else. Mission accomplished. The neighborhood learned an important lesson about the kind of people they elect to positions of power. I learned that sometimes fighting petty tyrants requires thinking bigger than they're capable of. And everyone learned that when someone tells you to use the community pool, they better make sure they still own it first. As for what happens next, well, that's a story for another update. Let's just say that my lawyer has been very busy lately, and there might be some interesting developments regarding other properties in the area that certain former board members have been trying to acquire through questionable means. But that's a tale for another day. Right now, I have a perfectly heated pool waiting for me, and unlike some people I could mention, I never have to worry about someone else's arbitrary rules about how and when I can use it. The water's fine, and the company is exactly what I want it to be. Update. 6 months later, the plot thickens. Well, several people asked for an update, and boy do I have one for you. Remember how I mentioned my lawyer had been busy? Turns out there was a lot more to uncover about our former HOA board than just financial mismanagement. About 3 months after the pool situation wrapped up, I got a call from my private investigator. He'd been doing some additional digging into the former board members' activities, partly out of curiosity and partly because some inconsistencies in the HOA documents had caught his attention. What he found was a conspiracy that made the pool sale look like small potatoes. The former president and 2 other board members had been running a side business for years. They would identify properties in the neighborhood that were struggling with HOA compliance, then systematically fine and harass those homeowners until they were desperate to sell. Once the owners were sufficiently worn down, shell companies connected to the board members would swoop in with lowball cash offers. They'd been doing this for almost 5 years, acquiring 7 properties at below market prices and then flipping them for massive profits. The swim spa fine wasn't just petty tyranny, it was part of a pattern. They were trying to force me out so they could buy my property cheap. The really sick part was how they operated. They would target elderly residents, single parents, and anyone else they thought would be vulnerable to harassment. One elderly gentleman had been fined repeatedly for his lawn not meeting their standards, even though he'd hired the same landscaping company the board president used. They kept moving the goalposts until he gave up and sold to one of their shell companies for $150,000 less than market value. My investigator found email chains between the board members discussing which properties to target next. They had a whole ranking system based on owner vulnerability and resale potential. My house was actually on their list because I was new to the area and they thought I might be easily intimidated. That backfired spectacularly. Armed with this evidence, my lawyer and I contacted the state attorney general's office. They were very interested in what we'd uncovered, particularly since it involved fraud, conspiracy, and abuse of fiduciary duty. The investigation moved quickly once they got involved. The former board members tried to claim everything was legitimate business, but the email evidence was damning. They'd literally discussed how to encourage specific homeowners to sell, including plans to increase fine schedules and enforcement for targeted properties. Last month, all 3 were arrested on multiple felony charges, including conspiracy to commit fraud, abuse of power, and racketeering. The local news picked up the story, and suddenly our quiet neighborhood was in the spotlight for all the wrong reasons. The best part was watching the former president's perp walk on the evening news. The same woman who had lectured me about respecting their authority was now in handcuffs, facing serious prison time. But the story gets even better. As part of the investigation, all properties acquired through their scheme had to be examined. It turns out several of the sales involved misrepresentation and could be voided. 3 families who had been forced to sell their homes at below market prices are now getting them back, plus damages for their losses. The elderly gentleman I mentioned earlier was so grateful when he heard the news that he actually came to thank me personally. Apparently, word had gotten around that I was the one who originally uncovered the financial problems that led to the broader investigation. He'd been heartbroken about losing his family home and thought he'd never see it again. The criminal cases are still working their way through the courts, but the civil suits have started settling. The homeowners who were defrauded are collectively getting millions in damages, most of which will come from seizures of the properties and assets the conspirators acquired illegally. There's also been an interesting development with my pool situation. The new HOA board approached me again, but this time with a very different proposal. They offered to purchase back the pool area at fair market value, which after my renovations is considerably more than I originally paid. I declined, but not because I wanted to be difficult. The truth is, I've grown attached to my private oasis. More importantly, having that daily reminder of what happens when people abuse their power seems healthy for the neighborhood. The new board completely understood and actually thanked me for uncovering the corruption. They've implemented new transparency measures and term limits to prevent anything like this from happening again. Property values in the neighborhood have actually increased since the story broke. Apparently, having a well-publicized example of HOA accountability is attractive to potential buyers. Who knew? I've also had some unexpected visitors. Other HOA victims from around the state have reached out asking for advice on dealing with similar situations. My lawyer has actually started specializing in HOA abuse cases and has a waiting list of clients. The irony hasn't been lost on me that what started as harassment over my swim spa has turned into a cottage industry of helping people fight back against petty tyrants in positions of power. As I write this update, I'm sitting in one of my poolside cabanas, watching the sunset reflect off the water. The former president's house just sold again. Apparently the new owners got a great deal since nobody wanted to live in the conspiracy house. The new neighbors seem lovely and have never once complained about pool noise. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd just quietly removed my swim spa and paid that fine. Those 3 criminals would still be in power, more families would have lost their homes, and the neighborhood would still be under the thumb of corrupt bullies. Instead, their own greed and arrogance led to their downfall. They thought they could intimidate me into giving up my property, but they picked the wrong person at the wrong time. The best revenge really is living well, and sometimes it's also making sure justice gets served with a side of irony. My swim spa, by the way, is still on my patio exactly where I installed it. The new HOA board has never mentioned it, probably because they're too busy focusing on actual community issues rather than measuring pool heights. And that community pool they told me to use? Well, I'm still using it every day. The water's perfect, the company is exactly what I want it to be, and nobody gets to tell me when or how to enjoy it. Some people learn the hard way that power without accountability is just organized bullying. Others learn that fighting back against bullies sometimes reveals much bigger problems that need solving. Either way, the water's still fine, and justice has a way of finding its level. Final update. 1 year later, justice served. This will probably be my last update unless something truly extraordinary happens, but I wanted to give everyone closure on how this all ended. The criminal trials concluded last month. The former HOA president received 5 years in prison plus restitution. The other 2 board members got 3 years each. All 3 are banned from ever serving on any homeowner association board again, which feels like appropriate cosmic justice. The civil settlements have been finalized as well. Every family that was defrauded has either gotten their property back or received full compensation plus damages. The total amount paid out was over $2.8 million, which came from seized assets and insurance claims. The neighborhood has completely transformed. The new HOA board has been so transparent and reasonable that several other communities have asked them to consult on governance reforms. We actually won an award from the State Homeowner Association Federation for Excellence in Community Leadership, which would have made the former president's head explode. My private pool has become something of a local landmark. Real estate agents actually use it as a selling point when showing houses in the area. This is the neighborhood where the homeowner bought the community pool, has become a surprisingly effective marketing line. I did eventually make one small gesture to the community. Every 4th of July, I host a neighborhood barbecue and open the pool for the day. It's become an annual tradition that brings everyone together and serves as a reminder of how much better things can be when people treat each other with respect. The elderly gentleman who got his house back always brings homemade apple pie. The single mother who is being harassed about her fence brings her famous potato salad. Even some of the former board members' neighbors come by, and we never mention the past unless they bring it up. It's funny how a story that started with such anger and frustration has led to something genuinely positive for everyone involved. Well, everyone except the convicted felons, but they made their choices. My swim spa is still exactly where I put it, still technically the reason this whole saga began. Sometimes I look at it and laugh about how a simple desire to swim laps in my backyard led to exposing a criminal conspiracy and transforming an entire community. The moral of the story, if there is one, is that standing up to bullies is always worth it. You never know what other problems you might solve or what positive changes you might create. Sometimes the best way to deal with people who abuse their power is to show them that power has limits. And sometimes the best revenge really is buying their swimming pool and turning it into your personal paradise. The water's still fine, the company is still perfect, and justice has definitely been served. Case closed. The next one is a pro-revenge story. This is a story about a piece of crap receiving their deserved karma several years later. Many years ago, I worked in the lovely career of retail. It's sadly normal for there to be a constant flow of shop scum that make you despise their existence, and there are those that are so horrific that what they do is burned into your mind forever. Fortunately, one of these unforgettable moments allowed me to extract my revenge. I had only worked in retail for 1 year in this newly built store and was starting to settle in. Getting to know the great customers and understanding that some people shouldn't be allowed outside, which being a shy person who hates conflict wasn't the best, but at least one of my customers was an absolutely adorable elderly lady who always made time to talk and was an absolute joy to be with. It had been some weeks since I had last seen her, but one morning I see her car park into the disabled parking bay, as she already has a blue badge. Only this time she hobbled out of the car on crutches with a pot on her leg. I didn't have chance to talk to her yet when a works truck, which did not have a blue disabled badge, pulled into the disabled space next to her and out-jumped an early 40s builder with their teenage kid. Well, this little old lady was having none of this and must have absolutely massive balls of steel and stood up to this ignorant builder and politely informed them that they shouldn't be parking there as it's for the disabled and he doesn't have a badge. What happened next? I can't forget. This builder decided the best course of action was to humiliate and insult this poor elderly lady in crutches, accuse her of faking her disability and claim the cast on her leg was a fake and that she probably milks the benefit system for as much money as possible, then walks off putting on an overdramatic fake limp, laughing away with their teenage kid whilst the old lady stood there in shock. Sadly, being one who lacks courage, I did absolutely nothing about it, and that would stick with me forever. I tried feebly to ask a manager later to do something about it, but they didn't care or want to get involved. For years, I worked in this store, always seeing this scum builder come in and out. Fortunately, I never interacted with this scum builder, but I saw them often, and every time I did, I would always remember what they had done vividly. I would still see them park in the disabled bays, and even got to the point where I would recognize them by the large blue Mercedes they drove. 7 years later, I was still working in this store, and this scum was still parking in disabled and looking like an absolute idiot. Yet this year, I was blessed with good fortune, and our store was outfitted with some absolute joyful equipment. Due to the high number of complaints, our store had set up a company to deal with the parking violations, but instead of having external parties coming in and ticketing cars, the staff of the store were given the ticketing machine, and it was our duty to go to the car park and record any cars that violated the parking rules. This was all done digitally, and there would be no paper tickets upon the cars. This was brilliant. As soon as I found out, I knew what I was going to do. It didn't take long for me to learn how to use the machine, and it certainly didn't take long for the opportunity to get revenge, and so it began. There were 3 rules for parking, and if you break these rules, there is a lovely £80 fine in return each time it happened. The first rule, no parking in disabled without a badge. And I know well that the scum builder is certainly violating this rule, and it wasn't long until I saw him next, and as soon as he entered the store, I quickly scurried out with the ticketing machine, and lo and behold, there was the oversized blue Mercedes in the closest disabled bay with no badge. I smashed them car details in with some well-shot photos and sent the report off so that they would receive a lovely letter of their fine they would ask to pay. That's not enough, though, but fortunately it takes weeks for them to finally receive the ticket, which grants me the opportunity to constantly ticket their parking violations. Because as you would expect, the scum would always park in disabled, and as I worked at the front of the store, I would always know when they had parked. After ticketing their car dozens of times, the scum unfortunately learnt their lesson as their oversized blue Mercedes no longer appeared in disabled parking bays. But as you expect, the scum would still be scum and they would find their new parking space inside child parking rule 2. Don't park inside child parking without a child. Had this scum gotten enough, I thought? Of course, not they haven't learnt their lesson and continue to be a complete wanker and park in the child parking, which we didn't have many spaces for. At this point, I knew all their car details by heart and would gleefully fill out the ticket machine as I skipped over to their car violating the child parking and take the photos needed for them, including shots of their cat seats that bear no child seats in them. And as it became routine, this once again carried on a few weeks more of tickets being created, and eventually they start receiving the fines. Fortunately, me being me, I am completely invisible to others and often looked over, and I have yet to be seen or caught. But as all good things must eventually come to an end, when the scum came into the shop, their blue turd automobile was no longer there in child parking or disabled. Has the scum finally learnt their lesson? Would you be surprised if they had not, as it didn't take me long to find them. Rule 3, you must park inside a marked bay. And what a surprise, the scum still manages to duck this up. They would park over the line, taking 2 spaces up. Well, guess what? That's a job for me and my ticket machine. Trying to park inside taxi parking but can't fit the big-ass car in it? Boom. That ain't inside a marked bay, and ka-ching another ticket and fine for the have one single wheel slightly over the white line of a bay? Well, guess who technically broke the rule? That's right, Scumbag did. And there goes a few more weeks of fun, until eventually Scumbag runs out of ways that they can possibly break the rules, and our company hires externally to start ticketing cars, so my beloved weapon of justice goes to rest. Now, I know what people are probably going to say, that all these fines are not enforceable because of blah blah blah, but I honestly don't care for a few reasons. Firstly, I'm being paid to do this, so either way, my time or money isn't wasted. Secondly, it did have an effect as they repeatable changed their parking habits. And thirdly, even if they don't end up paying, they are still going to spend a duck ton of the time and effort trying to overturn them over and over again, having to constantly be harassed by mail. Overall, if all the fines are counted separate and added up, they would have received thousands of pounds worth of fines building up over time for being scum. Cherry on the top, about 3 years later, I walk by this piece of scum on the car park and watch as they scream at some innocent dude in a high-vis jacket accusing them for being the one giving them all parking fines. Which put me at peace knowing this must have seriously got to them and cost them to still be raving mad after 3 years. The next one is a malicious compliance story. About 4 years back, I got hired as an IT consultant with a job description that said I would spend half my time answering phones and half my time modernizing the processes and internal communication. I've worked first-line phone support before, and it's actually an amazing way of learning how it all works, what users actually need, what processes actually work. And so that was fine by me. A week into the job, I pull my manager aside and tell him there are some security issues that need fixing ASAP, but I get told that I should STFU until I've been there 6 months and know what I'm talking about. I also tell him that the department has a lot of single points of failure, which is things like only one person knowing how to fix all our old systems from the late 80s. Same answer, STFU. I mean, okay, I'll STFU, but these are extremely obvious and extremely dangerous issues. Like, everyone has the same admin password and it hadn't been changed for 10 plus years. Disgruntled former employees have this password, and 4 months later, in which I only answered phones despite the job description, we found out the hard way that Russian ransomware hackers also had that password. So the entire company shuts down. All our stores are down, HQ is frantic, and we're running ragged trying to get anything resembling a working system up. Very expensive experts are hired, and I fail at concealing a smirk when they tell us that the very things I pointed out 4 months earlier were used in the attack, and their suggested solutions were pretty much exactly what I recommended back then. A few very stressful months later, the company is barely functional again. I get called in and fired because the manager doesn't feel like I fit in. I immediately crash with the stress of the last few months catching up to me, and so I'm unable to finish all my projects. The manager assigns my projects to other incredibly stressed out people who then also crash and or leave the company, including the absurdly important single point of failure, that one IT dude that knows how all the old systems work, and the entire department collapses. At this point, I know it's already cost the company about $20 million in lost revenue and consultant fees, but then roughly 2 years later, I'm called up by a recruiter who is asking if I'm willing to travel and get a bunch of international stores running after a ransomware attack. Me. It's not company, is it? Recruiter. Yes. Is that a problem? Me. Oh boy, yes, but it's not my problem, and you can tell manager that. Then I hung up, did a bit of online searching, and found out that not following my suggestions had, at that point, cost the company about 10 years worth of net profit. Anyway,